Many thanks for this lively presentation. I think you have also clearly explained some of the key issues, and I think you have perfectly prepared the scene for Paolo. I hand over to Paolo.
Thank you. I'll take this. When we discussed the format of this panel, it is months ago now, we thought one topic that would be worth discussing in detail is margin squeeze. More importantly, for one reason, it's an area which has been debated considerably in the last few years amongst lawyers and economists, and there's been recent cases which clearly has made a difference to our approach. For the avoidance of any doubt, my employer, Lloyds Banking Group, is not involved in any margin squeeze, nor I hope will it ever. As somebody who has had 3 cases, including one which lasted 6 years, so it's that experience which I'm bringing to the table. There's a lot of detail in the slides, but what I'll do, I'll go quickly, and obviously for more detail you can look there. And I'll deal with the key concept of margin squeeze, where it all started, and then focus on the key cases, which obviously were Deutsche Telekom and Telefonica. And then the case that was mentioned just now, the Telia Sonera judgment, which has changed the rules of the game as far as margin squeeze is concerned. And I'll compare finally that with the approach in the US, which couldn't be as far apart in any other area. Let's start with the basic. You have to have a company which is vertically integrated. That means there's a firm which supplies a wholesale input to itself. It's to its retail arm, which is also competing with competitors at the retail level, which are buying the product from the wholesale arm of the integrated company. So you have this very peculiar reaction where you have a firm, you can have a margin squeeze when the firm sets its prices at a level where competitors in the downstream market are unable to make a profit. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you have a wholesale input sold by the integrated company at 100, and you have the retail arm selling to consumer the product for 50. You can immediately see that if there is a competitor buying the wholesale product at 100, they will find it very difficult to compete. But that scenario, you have a negative margin, but you can have a very similar scenario where the downstream arm is selling, for example, at 100, because clearly there are costs associated with that, and the company is possibly not recovering those. And you might also have a margin squeeze where the company downstream is selling at 105. Let's imagine the cost downstreams are 20, so an equally efficient competitor will have costs of 20. So what you will have is the normal price would have to be 120. But you have the integrated company selling 105, and that leads to the exclusion of competitors. What is important in the margin squeeze is something which is very different from predation. In predation, we were discussing the fact that you have a company which is losing money. In a margin squeeze, the company might not be losing money because they might have such a high price at the wholesale level that that's where their profits are made. So if you look end-to-end to the company actually overall is making profits. When it all started, there were a lot of issues that were debated. Is it a separate form of abuse? What sort of abuse it is? What about the input? Does it need to be essential? What if competitor can go and buy that input somewhere else? What is the test? And we spend time reasonably efficient competitor or equally efficient competitor. Do you need dominance both upstream and downstream, or a level of control of those products? What about effects? What about the right measure to calculate costs and revenue? Those were issues which I remember, I think, in the various cases, 2000, 2003, were debated quite violently. But actually, margin squeeze didn't start with Telefonica and Deutsche Telekom. There are 3 cases which I refer here, which are quite old, especially the first, National Carbonizing, in 1988. And if you look hard into the case, lost in the decisions, there is a margin squeeze. I mean, those cases were much wider. They were dealing with a lot of different abuses. But actually, the origin are quite far in the past. What is different from those cases is that clearly those were very mature industries. Now, margin squeeze is applied to rapidly evolving technologies. And as you will see, it's always mostly telecoms. as you can see, all these cases clearly dealing with telecoms. And here, the wholesale input has been the lines that competitors have to buy in order to provide broadband services to the retail customer, basically to us. So what you have is you have those lines which the wholesale arm of the incumbent, they own. They have to sell it to third parties so they can provide services to consumers. Before you tell me that there's a mistake in these slides, I have to clarify the first one. Wanadoo is actually not, strictly speaking, a margin squeeze case. It's a predatory case. But it's there for several reasons, because if you read it together with Deutsche Telekom, some of the concepts that you will find in Deutsche Telekom are actually in Wanadoo. And more importantly, Wanadoo might have been a margin squeeze case, and it wasn't, because at the time, France Telecom didn't own the majority of Wanadoo. Deutsche Telekom. That was the first major case. What the Commission found was that Deutsche Telekom had charged downstream competitors a wholesale price for access to its network that would not have allowed a Deutsche Telekom downstream business to make a margin at the prices the downstream division charged. So basically, the spread was negative if you look at it. What is interesting in this case, Deutsche Telekom immediately argued, hold on a minute, my wholesale prices are being regulated by the National Telecoms Regulatory Authority. My retail prices are subject to a price cap, again imposed by the National Regulatory Authority. What's the problem? I had no other choice but to follow what I was told. And if there is a problem, you Commission should take it against the state, which through its national authority has forced me to do the following. And obviously, Deutsche Telekom also argued, if there are sector-specific legislation, you shouldn't, Commission, apply competition law. The Commission came back quite violently on both points. The first one is, even if there is sector-specific legislation, competition law will apply. And notwithstanding the fact that the regulator had approved your wholesale prices and you had a price cap downstream, you had still a margin of appreciation. You had the ability, even if not big, to change your prices. And that's where you committed the abuse. What is interesting in this case is obviously the analysis of cost and revenues, which is very, very complex. And I don't want to go into detail. But another point which is important in this decision is the Commission has a statement in its decision that says, by proving the existence of a margin squeeze, the Commission has done enough to establish the existence of a margin squeeze. So by just making a mechanical calculation, you have an abuse. So clearly nothing but what I would consider a per se abuse. But they were very, very careful at the time, because then they continue in the decision. Notwithstanding that, here's the effect. And actually all competitors are not being allowed to grow, etc., etc. So they did an effect-based analysis.